Thank you. The recommendations before us are that Council support or does not support Remit 1 on security system payments from Far North District Council and Central Otago District Council. Number 2, that Council support or does not support Remit 2 on improving joint management agreements from Far North District Council. Number 3, that Council support or does not support Remit 3 on alcohol licensing fees from Far North District Council. 4, that Council support or does not support Remit 4 on aligning public and school bus services from Nelson City Council. And number 5, that the Council support or does not support Remit 5 on the review of local government arrangements to achieve better balance from Tauranga City Council. And I'd now like to hand it over to our Manager of Governance, to Hannah. Tēnā koe, Hannah, if you could talk to us about this.
Tēnā koe, Madam Chair. Just a few comments before we go through this. There are some typos, unfortunately, in the recommendation. My apologies. So you will have noted that Remit 2 is actually from Northland Regional Council, so we'll need to update that in the recommendations on the screen. So that's Remit 2 is from Northland Regional Council, and Remit 3 is, in fact, from Far North District Council. I'm sure New Plymouth would have liked to have come up with the idea, but I'm not quite sure we got that from, sorry. The remits this year have been collated through the usual process. So these have, in the attachment, show you which zones have supported them or whether it was the metros, etc. So they've met all the criteria to go up to the AGM in July. And Councillor Barrett will be voting on behalf of the council, and so this is an opportunity for the council to direct Councillor Barrett as to how they would like him to vote. So I have a few updates additional to the papers that literally came through last night. The Remuneration Authority has decided that security system payments will be able to be included in allowances to elected members, not as allowances per se, but you will potentially be able to submit for a refund. So that is a done deal. So whether you wish to support regardless, but just to let you know that that is happening from the 1st of July. And the other piece which is relevant to recommendation 3 is also in the same notification, the new determination from the 1st of July from the Remuneration Authority. They have increased fees for elected members who sit on hearings panels, and so that would increase the cost to council for alcohol licensing should there be district licensing committees, so something to take into account. Other than that, Madam Chair, my recommendation would be potentially that we look at them individually, one by one.
Thank you very much, Hannah. We have some questions. Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I was just interested around the third remit around alcohol licensing fees, just the local context in terms of, is there a gap between the costs that we face and recovery of those costs? And if so, how big is it?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'd like to ask Angela Lumbey, our Manager of Environmental Protection Services, to speak to that.
Thank you. Angela Lumbey, Manager of Environmental Protection. Yes, we do have a gap. We have a gap of $200,000. So the service costs more than the revenue that we receive for that.
And that's $200,000 per annum or per annum?
Yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I think we may have asked this question a year or two back when we looked at this, but the delegation to Councillor Barrett to vote on behalf of our council at LGNZ, in terms of the principles of good decision making, usually that would include the ability to take in the information that's discussed at the time and remain open-minded to that. there isn't a recommendation here in regards to that. Do we understand that he would have the ability to consider the information at the time and decide which way to vote, or is he under obligation to vote in the way that the council indicates today is their preference?
I have to say that's a fantastic question. If I take you back to your delegations manual at the moment, usually you would have the mayor in this position. The mayor, under delegation, has delegated that to Councillor Barrett. The decision-making at the time, absolutely, I think under good decision-making, you would always be taking any new information from the room. The language in the recommendation is putting council's position rather than specifically saying Councillor Barrett must do X. So I think that this is flexible enough to allow him to do that.
Okay, and do you think we need to be specific in terms of that direction, or do you think that what you've said today is enough to give him the understanding that he has that freedom?
Taking into account that we did it this way last year and it didn't bring any challenges, and in previous years we actually haven't even done it at the council table, we've just relied upon the mayor to take the position of council and know what the position of council is on things, despite sometimes council not having a position. I think that this is probably less risky than that.
That's what, sorry?
I think this is less risky than in the past when we didn't give any particular position of the council to the voting member.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Naylor. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just following up on your opening comments, Hannah, where 1 and 3 have been overtaken by events, do we still need to vote on them? Will they still come forward as remits?
3 has not been overtaken, it was just additional information.
And 1?
1 has already happened.
But we'll still vote on it.
I think, my understanding is the AGM will still take the remit, because it may be that that LGNZ could then advocate for it to be in a different shape perhaps to what the Remuneration Authority has decided at this point.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any further questions? None. Thank you, Hannah. Welcome back. There is a advice that I've received that we look at this individually, each point. Do I have a person prepared to make movement on number 1? Thank you, Councillor Bowen. Okay, Councillor Bowen's happy to support all of them, and Councillor Naylor as well. Yes. Any comments? Yes, Councillor Bowen.
Sorry, nearly forgot. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yep, happy to support progressing all of these to the AGM as they all come to us with support from their various sectors where there has been good debate on these matters and raised by council with a particular view on them. And just on the process at AGM, I've done this for the last couple of years with or for the mayor, with other members as well. There's very little debate actually at AGM. They've really moved over the last few years to restrict the amount of comment that's made. So this has become much more of a pro forma kind of progression through to AGM, and I have every confidence that Councillor Barrett can respond appropriately on our behalf.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councillor Bowen, for reflecting on recent developments in LGNZ. Just on number 5, I'm not of a mood to support that one in particular, so take the votes how we want in terms of whether they get bundled up or not. But, you know, we've just been through a really comprehensive and relatively high cost in terms of time and money review exercise on this very matter. Change of government, and that all gets ignored, and now we've got councils wanting again to trigger off yet another cycle of review, at which point, change of government, ignore. I think the reality is that review was very thorough, it was very useful, it gave rise to some excellent recommendations. It would behoove any government of any stripe in this nation to pick some of them up and do something, rather than just trigger off another review. So I appreciate Tauranga has a new mayor, might be a bit frustrated that they weren't in that position to contribute actively to that review, but I see no reason to drag the sector through another review cycle. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just to say briefly, I'd like number 2 to be separated for a few simple reasons. It's not something I'm strongly opposed to, but looking at the reasoning and the recommendation that JMAs haven't been used widely, we know ourselves, we've just set up a joint CCO with our local iwi partners and looking at the project up on the hill. I don't think this is really restricting council's ability to work with their partners, and particularly in light of the replacement of the Resource Management Act, the amount of work versus the benefit you get from this, I just don't think it's particularly worth it, so I won't support that one.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would also, like Councillor Barrett, I believe that the recommendation 5 before us with the remit is actually a repeat of what we've just gone through recently, and so I wouldn't be advocating for that right now. The suggestion would be go back and look at the recommendations that the sector provided last time. So, a clear view. Thank you.
Do you want to take number 5 separately, Councillor? Thank you. So, councillors, what we'll be looking at is 1, 3, 4, right of reply. Councillor Bowen?
Just that I agree with the comments made about 5, and I think we should not support that one.
Thank you.
That's okay, you can move things to get it on the table, you don't have to vote for it.
So that's been moved by Councillor Bowen and seconded by Councillor Naylor, 1, 3 and 4. Can I ask that we go to the vote? Thank you. That has passed 14 to null, so unanimously passed. And now we are going to look at the second recommendation, and that has been moved by Councillor Bowen and Councillor Naylor as well. Any comment? We've already commented. Let's vote. Thank you. That has passed 12 votes to 2. Thank you. And now we move to recommendation number 5. Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Naylor, mover, Councillor Naylor, seconder? Oh, we've already got that, sorry. We can vote on that now, thank you. And that has failed 8 against and 6 for. Thank you. And now we're going to be moving to item 9. Kaka Tangiata Urban Growth Area, update and next steps, and the Deputy CE will be the lead officer next to me, and I invite Jono Ferguson-Pye, the Manager of the City Planning, along with Stuart McKenzie, Consultant Planning Advisor. Welcome to both of you. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou. Morning everybody. Jono Ferguson-Pye, Manager of City Planning. I might just get Stuart to introduce himself.
Kia ora koutou, Stuart McKenzie. Nice to meet you all, Madam Chair, councillors, and nice to be back in my hometown.
Lovely. Welcome. Welcome home. Thank you.
Madam Chair, just speaking to the report, before I climbed into the report, I did have a member of the public who obviously read this report and picked up that the reference to Sheriff's Road was not spelt correctly. So I said to her on her behalf, I acknowledge this at the council, at the meeting, so I've done that.
Thank
Get that
you.
out of the way.
I'm sure she'd be pleased that you did follow up on that.
Well, her last name's Sheriff, so she's got a close connection to that area. So
Here we have it. Well
there we
done.
look, the recommendation for the report really is to seek your approval to prepare a plan change to rezone the Kaka Tangiata area to future urban zone. It's probably fair to say that we've been grappling with this piece of work for a long time. If you read the report, this area first was included in our urban growth area in 2010. And then post the Christchurch quakes in 2010, 2011, given that there is some liquefaction risk at Kaka Tangiata, the decision was made back then to prioritise Whakarongo and let, I guess, the country try and grapple with how best to deal with liquefaction risk in the context of greenfield development. Then in 2021, we had Piniti as adopted by the NZTA board. Obviously, the freight ring road it has a very close proximity to Kaka Tangiata. From 2008 to 2019, we updated and reviewed our plan through the sectional district plan review, and then over sort of 2015 to 2021, we increased the scale of Kaka Tangiata to respond to the shortage of greenfield land for the city. So we went from around 300 hectares up to over 800. To give you an idea, that was well over 7,000 houses. That's roughly the number of houses in Fielding, to give you a little bit of a scale comparison there and understanding. Excuse me. And then in 2024, through the LTP, it was decided to remove funding of growth infrastructure to support Kaka Tangiata, which was a very, I guess, posed some challenges for staff in terms of moving the plan change forward. It was decided that we'd look at other funding mechanisms for that growth infrastructure, for example, IFFA funding. Just as a note, I was talking to a colleague about a month ago who had helped another TA go through the IFFA process with Crown Infrastructure Partners for a significantly big piece of infrastructure for that TA. It cost that TA $1 million just to actually bring that application together for that funding. Recognising though that the current government is looking at making that simpler, but we just don't know what that looks like at this stage. What I would say is the future urban zone would avoid, at least in the medium term, the need to enter in that process. Obviously, significant work has been undertaken on this plan change between 2019 and 2025. We've spent a considerable amount of resources with technical reports, developing quite detailed master plans and conversations with landowners, developers and the surrounding community. Again, just to give you a little bit of a comparison about where we are with technical reports, we do have quite a comprehensive suite of reports, but they are far from being finalised. If we were to go to what I call a full live zoning, for example, our transport assessment, which is in very draft form, we would have to spend probably $120,000 to $130,000 just doing traffic counts and modelling that for a live rezoning, and that's just one report out of about 10 or 11. In August last year, I signalled through the 3-year work program report that we were looking at a reset for Kaka Tangiata and seeing what the best pathway forward was to progress the rezoning of that area of the city. I guess thinking about the fuzz and explaining what it is and what it isn't, what it does do is very much a holding zone. It formally acknowledges the area being suitable for urban growth in the future. It protects the area from inappropriate subdivisional development that might underline the future rezoning, and sets a clear process and framework for live rezoning through private plan changes. So what the fuzz would do is it would provide a very high level structure plan which would outline some of the key connector roads, a very high level response to stormwater, some locations for local business zones and reserves. And then there would be a planning framework that would sit behind that, and then private plan changes would come in and then that would guide the nature of the private plan changes as they fleshed out the detail at a site-specific level in a way that gave effect to the structure plan and all the planning provisions that sit inside the FUS. So it's almost a two-step approach to zoning, but it is a formal planning mechanism that is recognised in the planning standards. It has with it I guess an advantage where we don't need quite the level of technical evidence that we'd need for a live zoning. That cost essentially would be passed on to developers. They could still use the information that we've developed, but it would be looking at, I guess, growth plan for growth in terms of private plan changes. But it would probably also, I think, make us have to work alongside developers a bit more closely than we have done in the past with respect to rezoning land. Excuse me. Look, the report also just talks about, we're in a limited resource environment. We're looking at moving to a reliance on private plan changes in some areas of the city and shifting cost. I think it's probably fair to say that PCG was quite a prescriptive plan change. It cost us a significant amount of money. We continue to still spend significant amounts of money defending that in the Environment Court at the moment. And the FUS certainly isn't as prescriptive. It doesn't need quite the level of investment from council, but also it doesn't give us quite the level of control that we've got over development at Okotree, for example. It guides that and shares that with the development community through private plan changes. I think what the FUS tries to do is to maximise the level of planning outcomes for the city while minimising the cost to the ratepayer. So we need to think really carefully about how we best utilise our spend. And we think the FUS will shift, I guess, the focus on growth place for growth, and probably we think this will speed up the process in terms of getting that land rezoned over time. Look, through the 3-year work program that I talked about in August, I was really clear that we've got a big work program. We're trying to get a lot done. We are looking at different ways around how we deploy our consultancy spend and how we maximise planning decisions and provide for growth for the city. We've got if we look at growth, including Kakatangiana, we've got sort of 9 growth areas in the city that we're managing. Much of our plan is well over 10 years old and requires a review. We've started the sectional district plan review. And we're also having to grapple with changes to the MPSUD in terms of high evidentiary thresholds and information that now need to feed into housing and business needs assessments and the future development strategy. Just lastly, we talk about the relationship of the FUS and that decision with the new RMA replacement legislation that the government is starting to feed some of the detail out on that currently. And some of that information is incredibly fresh and new. There was a discussion document that was issued last week, which provided a little bit more detail on the government's intentions. What I would say there is that the national planning standards are unlikely to disappear. It's part of the RM replacement. I think it's fairly clear that the government supports the standardisation of planning instruments across the country, and we don't think that's going to change through the current changes that are being proposed at the moment. I guess the other key thing is that it's really clear that district plans under the new RMA replacement bill will be looking at taking a narrower view around control. So district plans, in terms of that threshold of control, the new legislation is going to be really clear that the threshold of effects is going to be lowered. So currently, if the effect is de minimis, someone's affected, look, the new legislation is looking at taking that up to minor or more than minor, which means that the breadth of effects and control that district plans currently have over land development are going to be reduced. And I think that move away from a prescriptive approach has been quite clearly signalled by the government. I think that on balance we feel, in terms of our best advice to you, is that if we spent a whole lot more money finishing all those technical reports and went down that prescriptive route with with this plan change, it would probably be a waste of resource. So, look, happy, I know I've taken a little bit of time just to set the scene, but happy to take questions. Oh, sorry, just one thing before I leave. Stuart is actually here specifically to answer any questions you might have around the FUZ, in particular, for his sins. Stuart was the planning manager at Porirua City, and he was he led the rollout of the FUZ in Porirua City, working with the developers there. So we thought it would just be useful if you had any sort of real world questions around how that worked for Porirua. He's here to answer those questions. Back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Jono, and also Stuart. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I hope you can appreciate this is an area of interest for me, so I've got a few questions. I just wanted to start by asking on page 41, there's a point you made where you said the decision of the LTP not to fund supporting infrastructure for Kākatangiata has been an impacting factor, and you repeated it in your commentary. My understanding of that decision was it was to determine the mechanism of funding, i.e. that we'd fund it through an IFF, not to say that we wouldn't fund it. So are you suggesting that, for example, by determining that Nature Calls would be funded through an IFF, that's the equivalent of not supporting building it? What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is the traditional method of funding growth infrastructure has been through growth programs and LTP feeding into development contributions. I guess what I'm saying to that is that when we take a plan change to a panel, we can have a great package of evidence that justifies the planning response. But what the panel also require of us is to demonstrate that we've got funding provided for supporting infrastructure. And I guess at the moment the jury is out with a decision maker as to whether IFF funding actually meets that threshold of funded. And if it doesn't meet that definition of funded infrastructure support growth, even though the plan change is a very good document and it's well resourced, it may not be approved. So there's an element of risk there we're trying to manage, and we're not sure that any other council has been in a similar situation, so it's hard to have those conversations at times.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. I went back to the report from May 2023 where we initially approved funding additional support to progress this plan change, and in that report it said a draft plan change is unlikely to be completed until mid-late 2024. We're now a year after that, and not only do we not have a draft plan change, you're suggesting that we're still millions of dollars off a draft plan change. What went wrong that we didn't know 2 years ago?
It's probably fair to say that we didn't realise what the true cost would be. I think we were still in the midst of getting some learnings from the Aokautere plan change. And once we had a full understanding of the Aokautere plan change, we went, oh, wait a minute, this is in the order of 2 or 3 times bigger than that. I think the other issue is we've never dealt with a plan change of this scale. Like I said, it's a big piece of work. And look, when I came in to take over the team a couple of years ago, I was firmly of the opinion that we did need to look at the scale of this so that we could somehow better manage it and scale it down a little bit. It has taken us a while to actually work through what the best way forward is. So, yeah, just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. I am interested in the next steps after the FUZ, so hopefully make it worth your time coming to the chamber. So I just want to understand, do we then, obviously we work with private plan changes as we go through that and provide some guidance there, but is the intention that council then would also progress our own plan changes in a staggered manner, or is it we set it as an FUZ and then everything else is dealt with through private?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think what we're saying is that that through the FUZ, we'll call it the FUZ, that our expectation would be that this would be picked up through private plan change applications, and certainly there's a number of motivated landowners in the Kākatangiata area. The Madison block, which sits outside the Kākatangiata area, we're currently having conversations with that landowner, and we've said to them, quite clearly that actually our focus is on the reduced Kākatangiata area. If you want to go ahead with the Madison block, you can. They're doing that. We're likely to receive a plan change for 700 lots there, so we've said to them, look, we'll leave the market to deal with that. I think in this case our intention is, given we know we have some motivated landowners that predominantly would be private plan changes, I think at the end of that process where there isn't land rezoned, there could be pieces of land where either developers haven't aggregated that land into larger holdings, that there may have to be a mop-up council-initiated plan change at some point for those areas that aren't zoned. Happy to give Stuart a bit of input on that.
Through the chair. So there is also the potential for developers, and I think it's a huge benefit of Kakatangiata that there are motivated developers ready to go. They can actually jump on the coattails of the future urban zone, so they could actually submit to be included within the FUZ plan change. So you could actually have a combination of the FUZ plus sort of dedicated, spatially defined development areas. Now, they could be, as John has mentioned, they could be as private plan changes, or they could actually be adopted as council plan changes. So you'd actually have the future urban zone established for the wider area, plus spatially defined live zoning, if you like. So that's what the FUZ, some of the flexibility that the FUZ offers. The other benefit that we experienced in Poteroa with a couple of the major developers was the ability to enter into memorandums of understanding to cost share. Okay, so actually for that more detailed work required to bring those bits of land forward, there's actually the ability for the council to require that the developers pay for that, and that way we actually, we can facilitate that live zoning without any additional cost to council. So there is quite a bit of flexibility in how the FUZ can work in that respect.
Thank you. One of my questions is, this has been prepared on the basis that we would exert the same level or similar level of control as we did in Plan Change G over Plan Change H. An option that isn't considered in this report is a less prescriptive plan change that doesn't exert as much control. Is that something that we've considered?
I guess I have a different view of that, Councillor. I felt what the report was saying was that the FUZ would be exerting less control, and that the FUZ would be a less prescriptive approach to zoning.
But it would still require then a secondary process after it's been put in place for a developer to be able to build anything.
Yes, correct. That's correct. I think if you look at the Going for Housing Growth discussion paper that the government published last week, they were talking about a similar approach, but actually rather than a plan change, it potentially could be a resource consent. But from our point of view, we think if we put the FUZ in place, whatever direction the government goes, it will be a more streamlined approach to rezoning ultimately.
Okay. My last question was, could we consider a small area? I appreciate it's gone from 300 to 800, but I would rather see 100 hectares zoned for development in the first 5 years and then another 100 in the next 5. Do we have to bite it all off at once, or can we break it down and do a FUZ for the latter 700 and then finish a plan change on the first few hundred? Do we have to do it all as one or nothing?
When you're looking at land use planning for suburbs, these are areas that families will be living in for the next 200 years. When you're looking at infrastructure and trying to maximise your planning for infrastructure and staging that over time, and then when you look at the need in terms of our shortage of greenfield land, we think this reduced area of 300 is appropriate. I think if you then also marry that up with the landowner motivation to rezone land, I think the bigger area is appropriate.
Right. Thank you, John. Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just under the details of option 4 on page 40, talks about one of the benefits is this is a nationally, of the FUZ, that this is a nationally standardised best practice. How long has that been the best standardised best practice?
Through the chair, I'm happy to answer that. So it was part of the national planning standards which were rolled out by the government probably 6 years ago, I think now. So it's been part of sort of the recognised national practice, and a lot of councils since 2019 have rolled out future urban zones. So Tauranga, Auckland, Selwyn, Christchurch, Poteroa, and also Wellington as well. So there is quite a, I guess, some good examples there of good practice, certainly in both the Poteroa and Wellington examples. That has now progressed to live zoning over thousands of hectares of development suitable land. So yes, there's quite a bit of proven practice around it. So it's a recognised tool.
Yep. Thank you. So has this tool? I'm just trying to understand why perhaps we hadn't considered this sooner. Is this been considered in the last 6 years?
No, but to be fair, it hasn't been on our radar. And certainly when I looked at the reset, I guess this came out of that reset to see what the options were.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of, you know, the fact that there has been some investment that's already occurred, and I'm presuming that if we move to this, that the cost that we're minimising will fall on developers and landowners. What impact will that have on our DC's policy?
I think there's a couple of elements to that question. The first issue is that money isn't wasted. We can use it for the fuzz, but also it's been used by private developers who are looking at developing their own plan changes. So they're using that information. So, for example, the Manderson block, they're using quite a bit of the technical information we've developed for Kakatangiata to feed into that plan change. So that investment isn't wasted. In terms of how it might or might not feed into the DC policy, at this stage it won't, because we don't have any growth programs for this part of the city. So that'll depend on the funding mechanism that we put in place. So there's a number of options there. Obviously the government's moving towards replacing development contributions with a new development levy regime. We don't know what the detail of that is, so it may well feed into, you know, maybe a type of targeted rate for landowners rather than developers. We might go to the IFFA funding, or it might be a mix of development levies and then individual developer agreements where some developers pay for infrastructure that benefits just their area. So I think the jury's out on that at the moment. I think the settings around funding are fluid at this point.
Okay, and just the final question relates to the risks that are identified under option 4 as well, where it's untested and not fully understood or accepted by landowners or developers. In plain, you know, language, how would you describe the pathway to those who might want to develop it under the fuzz, so that it's easy for them to and us to understand? How would that look for them?
Yeah, look, first of all, we've been having a number of conversations with landowners and sort of talking about this report coming to council today and having those conversations already. I guess the way that we're describing it to them is it's a two-step process to rezoning, and that what this process will do will give you some clear direction on when you go to lodge a private plan change. So it'll be very clear to you as a developer about a high-level structure plan and what that's required, about the information requirements and those elements that council need to see in terms of outcomes there. So we're really talking about the fuzz as being a supporting element to those landowners' intentions to rezone.
Thank you. And just following on from that, so do you believe that if we make this change, that will be a more straightforward process or a less straightforward process for those developers or landowners than our current process?
Well, I think if we talk about our current process being we want to rezone the land ourselves as council, I would say the fuzz is a more straightforward process, because the cost and the time it's going to take for us to resource what I would call live rezoning, it's unlikely that we'll have the land rezoned even in the next 3 years.
Okay.
By the time we go through finalising the reports, going to a hearing, plan change G, it's like well over a year, and we're still in the middle of environment court proceedings with that. So I think if we look high level, that this would be a more straightforward and direct route to rezoning land.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Naylor. Councillor Haputa.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just 2 questions. So you said that you've talked to developers, so you've talked to Race and Whakwa about option 4?
We haven't talked to Race because that land, Kikawhenua, is zoned already, but we have been talking to Mr Whakwa and his agents, and there's also another development interest there close to the Trotting Club that we've been talking to also.
Okay, so option 4 you're recommending to us over all the other options, primarily because it's the best option and the quickest option out of all of them?
Look, I think it's the quickest option in terms of getting land rezoned. and probably the most cost-effective option. Yes, it does. It means that we're not going to have as much control over that development as we've had, say, for example, at Okotiri. But I think when you balance, cost and speed, I think this pathway will get us land rezoned more quickly, less costly. But I think we will still have an acceptable level of control in terms of the outcomes out there.
Get houses up faster.
Correct.
Thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Haputa. Councillor Zabalan, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hello, Korua. My question is about rating for the existing residents in the potential fuzz area and whether presumably they are rated currently as a rural semi-service category, and would that potentially change to residential under a fuzz designation, or would that not happen until residential zoning was live?
Look, I stand to be corrected by my finance colleagues, but my understanding with rates is not so much about the use of the land, it's the accessibility to infrastructure that sort of sets that rate. So the only increase in rates that might come out of the fuzz process is that if the fuzz, because it provides more certainty and clarity around future use, whether the market might value that land more attractively, and then so that market value may increase rates. In terms of just general ratings, the general ratings policy, my understanding, it's around the access to infrastructure, and that's a while off. But, recognising that rezoning proposals over time does create uncertainty for landowners and affected.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zabalan. Councillor Fitzgerald.
Tēnā koe, Madam Chair. Kia ora, Jono, and welcome, Stuart, or welcome back if you've been here before. Nice to have you in the chamber. Jono, you mentioned having talked to interested parties, particularly land developers around the area. Are they aware of the Council's preferred option for option 4, and are they supportive of it?
Look, I think, to be fair about those conversations, I think they're still processing that. Okay. The reality is, I think that where we're heading with the fuzz, but also I think where the government is heading with respect to greenfield development, I think that it's going to mean more costs for developers in terms of developers paying for that infrastructure costs. So there's a lot, I think there's a lot for developers to actually digest at the moment. I think if you look at the developer levy regime that the government is rolling out, I think it's indicating that there's more of a neoliberal economic setting, which is growth pays for growth, which means developers will be having to probably reach into their pocket a bit more than they had to in the past to provide supporting infrastructure.
Sure. And the government's direction that you're speaking of, that's the National Infrastructure Plan that's just dropped. Is that what you're referring to?
Well, there's such a lot at the moment, isn't there? Yeah. Look, I think probably if you look at the suite of government direction at the moment, whether it be resource management reform around funding instruments, the way they're viewing infrastructure in general, and the philosophy that's being applied to how that financing and funding of infrastructure is to occur, I think you'd probably say collectively, the government's been really clear that it really needs to be moving to more directly user pays and growth paying for growth.
Sure. Wonderful. Thanks, John. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, John, and welcome, Stuart. One question for each of you. I think this one probably for Stuart, just in following up from Councillor Zabalan's line of questioning around fuzz designations and those influences on property value. You've got some experiences in other communities. Has there been a shift in property value just with the fuzz alone?
So for all intents and purposes, the land remains rural. So one of the key benefits of the fuzz is that it actually prevents inappropriate primary production rural residential development. So it actually retains the ability for dense urban development. But in saying that, no, there's actually hasn't been a big shift. So if I look at the Northern Growth Area in Poteroa, Lincolnshire Farm in Wellington, Judgeford Industrial Area between the Hut and Porirua. No, it's really once the live zoning comes through, and once
Great.
that's also matched by infrastructure planning and investment, that you see that shift, as Jono mentioned.
Cool, thank you. And for you, John, just in terms of, you talked before about people living in these places for hundreds of years. So in terms of those long-term infrastructure and community outcomes, how much of a compromise is option 4 compared to option 1?
Look, I think when we look at, and I keep on going back to Plan Change Te Ata Kotiri, because that is a very prescriptive, we have a lot of tight control over the detail there. We won't have as much control around the detailed elements, but I think we'll have a similar level of control in terms of influencing and directing the high level elements around urban form, urban connectivity, those sorts of things. One of the issues we do face though is that if you look at RMA reform that's coming, I think any future prescriptive planning instrument is unlikely to be able to sort of get itself through the Section 32 or the equivalent Section 32 assessment. So if we look at the structure plan that has the detailed structure plan that we've been working on, there was Jeff Baker at the time did a fantastic job working with Rangatane in developing that structure plan. I think we'll take those high level elements out of that work. The whānau ora principles, for example, really informed the development of that master plan. It's likely that we'll take some of those key principles and weave them into the FUZ planning instrument also.
Thanks. So in terms of the kind of what has eventuated in Summerhill Kotiri in terms of, tens of millions of dollars of gap in terms of stormwater infrastructure and transport infrastructure that wasn't met by the development but is now being loaded onto the wider community through raids. Like, how much risk do we have if we go down option 4 here of kind of being in a scenario where 10, 20 years time there's millions being loaded on the wider community because they weren't captured here?
Look, to some degree, the resource management planning and zoning is a separate issue to how you fund and finance supporting infrastructure. I mean, obviously, the planning framework has to be done in a way that enables an efficient, response with respect to rolling out supporting infrastructure. The answer to your question really is that'll really depend on the new developer levy legislation and how effective that is in terms of covering the cost of growth. It'll depend on our ability to work with developers with developer agreements and our decisions around IFFA or other funding. I guess what I would say is I was at the Development Contributions Working Group conference about a month ago actually in Hamilton, and just talking to some of those councils saying that, they're saying that DCs haven't been collecting the full cost of growth, for example. It's on public record. Tauranga has one of the most well-resourced, organised development contributions teams in the country. In the last 15 years, development contributions, there's a $40 million hole between what they've spent and what they've collected in DC. So I think the government's recognising that DCs have been a good step in the right direction in terms of growth paying for growth, but it hasn't been a policy instrument that has been collecting all of it. Hoping that the developer levy approach that the new government is taking will help with that particular issue. What I would say is it doesn't matter what approach we take, we'll never get a one-for-one matching on developers providing for growth, because we're planning for growth over such a long time period and planning for infrastructure over a long time period. I think if any system collects 85-90%, you've probably done quite well over a 10 or 20 year period.
Thank you. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. There being no further questions, thank you, Jono, and thank you, Stuart, very much. Councillors and staff, what I'm going to do is say we'll adjourn at this moment in time, and we will meet back again after the Culture and Sport meeting and resume. We don't have much more to go, but I think this is an appropriate break in the space. And councillor Bowen, 1 o'clock back here. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Kia ora koutou.